I can assist someone, but I don't assist very well because I haven't done it in several years and I didn't go practice doing it, okay? An average yoga teacher who's at a yoga studio who has certification has 500. Some of them have a 200 level cert. Do you see why 40 doesn't give me a right to even think about introducing a yoga pose? Now, having said that, I am going to show you this thing that I like to do, and if you know how to do it. But lion's breath, okay, is in the same shaky thing. Any of you know lion's breath? Like, you know it, let's do it. You just go, okay? You just shake it all out. Now, actually, you're not supposed to be learning. You're supposed to do this and all sorts of stuff. But it's this, that's the biggest part, screaming it out. You know how many times we hold stuff in and we just want to scream after what we heard? Or we want to shake it off after what we listened to? Right? We do crazy stuff as people. That's what we do in these professions. Now, I don't think I'm alone in that case because I did all that, but hang with me. All right, the somatic transference, a working definition, the unconscious bodily organizing activity of the intersubjective states between two people that is inherently relational. So I'm honoring Bob Stollerose, Robert Stollerose quote still. But I take this into the somatic, that this organizing activity is expressing physiologically, neurologically, energetically, biochemically, functionally, and structurally. Okay? That's all going down while you're sitting there. All sorts of stuff's going down in your body. We know that when we're sitting with our client, we're creating new neural networks because physiologically that's what the brain's doing with the long-term talk therapy because we're rewiring the attachment processes through the mirror neurons that never got laid correctly with our attachment-injured patients, right? And your ability to do that well or not is going to depend on whose health? Yours and mine, right? And so we have to be aware of our process. So if you're going to do this work, guess whose therapy you need to be in? Your own. And guess what consultation you need to also be in? Your own. You know why? Because you're continually being affected and changed, and there's new concepts that are stirring up, and you've got to learn and know what's getting kicked up for you so you know how to manage it back with the other people. Somatic transference is a term I've used to capture the process of the emerging and often unconscious bodily states that are activated within and between the therapist and the client in the shared relational space. Okay? That stuff's coming up all the time. So sometimes I'm finally learning, I don't do it all the time still, because it's unconscious sometimes, right? We don't realize it's happening. But to pause and breathe. Pause and breathe. Do it now. You stop breathing, some of you, I see you stop breathing. I can tell it from up here, okay? And sometimes I just know because a lot of us just don't breathe, right? Okay. Now, the article you have, this little quote was in the article that I gave you. So if you got the article in the handouts, it's where I kind of talk about all this. I did it for the LA Camp Show a few years ago. And the second page of the article has all my contact information on it. So, because it was a section that had another article finishing, and I just covered that so you weren't confused how to use it. So what I teach is that the neuropsychophysiology of the transference parallels the neuropsychophysiology of attachment, right? The same stuff is going on. It's happening. And our neurologic, your brain, your nervous system, structurally and functionally, it's getting affected and changed. The psychological, your cognitive, your affect, your relationships, they're being affected and interacted with and changed. And physiologically, your somatic body, your organ systems, your endocrine systems, your meridian systems, your chakras. Any of you done acupuncture? Have you ever felt when you put a needle in and all of a sudden your toe gets yanked across the room by the needle? You know what I'm talking about? It was like this serious, I'm overexcited, but it's a serious grab. Have you ever felt that when a needle pulls something and then something moves in your body? And sometimes it's just calm and you don't notice anything. Okay, there's an energy system that is not in Western literature. It's called the meridian system, and I believe it's real. It's there. I don't think we're at a space cadet age about it anymore. There's real studies, and if you go from the Eastern culture, they've got this stuff and it's working. Okay, but I don't think that replaces our Western. Good Lord, there's certain diseases we'd all be dead of right now if there weren't some kind of medicine we took at some point in our lives to keep us here, right? So we need both. We need surgeries at times, and we also need talk therapy at times, and we also need body movement at times. We also need to be in our bodies and learn how to rewire things physically, right? All that stuff's going on. So let's talk about spiritual transference. This thing is moving on me, or did I do that? The spiritual transference. Okay. Spirituality is beginning to be, would you say, accepted more and more to be able to be talked about. Whereas even 10 years ago it was a little dicier, and 20 years ago it was really not okay. I have a master's in theology, and I was always in my interviews really making sure they knew I was not going to try to go in there and get everybody saved. Okay? I was just, that's my tradition, and I'm Christian, and I'm more than Christian now. I mean, I'm very open, and any faith, I believe, has its way of honoring, so don't get hung up on that. But that is my heritage and my tradition and how I make sense of things. If we had an earthquake right now, I'd be praying to Jesus. Okay? So I'm just saying that's where my faith goes. But I don't need your faith to go there, and I honor that some people don't even conceptualize what we might call spirituality with faith language or religious language. But your clients come in with a history, okay? And you walk in with a history, right? And some of you, when you heard Christian, something went, something went, oh no. Some went, yes, finally, right? You had all these different things go on, okay? Your clients are the same way. And they're not sure they're allowed to bring their faith into the room. I have one client who talked about, wow, I can talk about all my spirituality. My last clinician said, you might not want to mention that to the psychiatrist because he doesn't believe in any of that. Isn't that inappropriate? So what I'm just saying is you have your own issues, they have their issues, and creating an understanding. Because what's going to change for you, regardless of where your faith is, if you sit with some of these injuries and some of these stories with people, it'll rattle your faith in God if you come from a good faith God. It will challenge it. It doesn't mean you don't believe in God. I'm just saying it rocks some of your faith stuff. And then if you come at it from no faith and you see someone who's found faith. I have clients who once they got into their faith in a good community church, even a fundamentalist church, found support paralleling what you can get in a good AA support group. Okay? Because it's community. What works for people is the community. AA's got some good stuff going on. Your churches have some good stuff going on. Your temples. All these different organizations, your yoga studios actually are becoming another place of community and safety. Your people need community because we need relational connection also. But how do you make sense of that? How do you make sense of God, energy, religion, the language? You've got to watch. Do you get offended if your patient starts talking about this? Do you think they're psychotic, if they've actually heard from God? You know, what's going on? But some faiths have a way of hearing from God. And if you got into my personal history, you go, you know, because I've got some faith history there. Big faith history. What the heck? All right, there we go. So, I want to talk about that. Oh, well, I guess I'm kind of toward the end. So what I want to talk about a little bit about the spirituality piece of it, I'm going to dial back to that for a minute, is that you're sitting there with your client and you have stuff coming up for you. You're not sure where you're going to go with that. And you may even want to refer to a minister. When I talk about being a collaborative treatment team, that is the next slide, we work together. We have our 3 core who meet regularly, but we also bring in others as needed. And the key in my role, when I see my role there, is that I'm going to make sure we're holding a safe space and not getting out of control of the dynamic process of what's happening with all of that. So that's kind of where you want to look at the treatment team side of it. So I'm just spinning that in. So I guess I want to ask if there's any questions before I go back into some more stuff on this. Any comments or questions so far? Okay. How many of you practice with a mind-body approach? Give me bigger. Okay. How many of you don't, but you've considered it? Okay. And what does it mean? I want to ask, and then I'll fall back in. What does it mean in the room if you say you're working with from a mind-body perspective? I don't want to have a big conversation. I just want to say, are you doing the body work? We have a lot of people doing actual body work in the office. And the somatic experiencing or Pat Ogden's work. No? Okay. You're just kind of folding in as you go, right? Okay. Are you seeing differences in your patients when you're beginning to do that? Yeah? Yeah. And those of you who are considering it, are you considering because the literature's talking about it more? Is that what's that, or are you having your own experiences with it?
I've had my own personal experience with it, and I found it integrating that with just regular therapy was a lot more helpful in understanding where where you were saying where you hold some of those emotions, and so I found trying to bring that into some of the therapy work that I was doing, but I wanted to practice and get more experience.
Sure. Okay, that's great. So some of us are finding it on our own. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to this. I had severe chronic fatigue. I was the training director down at the Guidance Center in Long Beach. And I started getting sick. And then I started needing to sleep like 18 hours a day. And I was not well. I was not functioning. I was a hard driver, go, right? And function, and achieve, and just keep going, and push. I was a runner. I was just, and then my body started shutting down. And I got better, then I went for a run, I went for an 8-mile run, and then I crashed, and never came back from that. And now I don't run for a lot of reasons, like my knees, and I haven't run for so long, and you have to kind of get back into running, right? You can't just jump and go after we're not doing it for several years. But my experience when I was so sick is that I went to Western Docs, and that didn't work. And I found a homeopathic doctor who helped. And then I found an integrative medicine doctor who helped. And then I found yoga, which had me in my body. Gentle yoga, restorative yoga. And that's part of what I want to talk to you about, is that sometimes folks who come to me have no interest whatsoever of being in their bodies. They're very more talk-based. And a lot of times the folks who come to the yoga therapist start out in their bodies, and she has a heck of a time getting them to come talk to me, because they're more body-based. But have you seen this with some of your patients? Sometimes they're not really taking care of their bodies. They're not even clued in on their bodies. They're not feeling it. They don't know where. When I pose the question, are you feeling it in your body? Where do you feel it? I do sometimes just get a blank, right? So some of those folks I'm wanting to actually move into beginning to feel more, beginning to experience more, beginning to even get to know that their body exists. So that's what we're kind of working with also. So I want to also point out that the acupuncturist versus the yoga therapist, and we speak to that difference, because they're both getting in the body, they're both working with the meridians, they're both working with the chakras in their own way. But the yoga therapist has the client doing the work of their own initiation, right? She's not doing that to her body. She's inviting her to be the actor in her body, or him. The acupuncturist, though, is doing for the patient. They go in and these things are happening to them. So it's a slightly different way of coming in. And some patients' entry is through being helped and brought in that way, and some patients are being brought in through moving into themselves. And some patients will not go to any of these referrals unless they have a relationship with me. Okay? And so you're going to have to, this goes back to the relationship and the relationship dynamics and talking about the process and how that's going to look and how that's going to feel and what that's going to be like. So I'm aware that I am powering along and have moved faster than I expected. So I'm trying to see what I can speak to a little bit more here. What would feel good to get more of? Because I can wheel on some other stuff. Yeah.
How to help our clients get in touch with, they need to do something with their body. If they're not there.
They're not in their bodies. But I think what I would see, I think what I'm talking about throughout this is that when you're working with your patient and they're not in their bodies, what I'm saying right now is that you start cueing them to it. You start asking them about their body. And even before that, you start noticing. You start observing. Where's the breath? Where's the, are they breathing? And some of you may go, how do I know if they're breathing? Just look at the person next to you for a minute. You can see it, you can smile, people are smiling. But you can tell if they're breathing, right? If you look, their chest goes up and down a little bit. Their body goes up and down a little bit. There's a little bit of movement, right? Okay? So you can tell that the person's breathing. How can you tell if they're not? They're very still. And there's a little different energy in their face, right? So you just begin to observe. Really just begin to observe. Are they like this? Are they open? Do they move a lot? What's their gait walking in? A lot of us as therapists have learned to assess these things for other reasons, neurologically. I'm talking about just look at how they carry themselves. The client that I had who, that I couldn't stop yawning, the first one I really began to discover that with, this was her walking in the room. Okay? She was racing. racing to get down the hall and into the office and into the chair. It's the same one who's not, she's very contained, and she saw the yoga therapist. I was just like, my gosh, we were just kind of going through the same stuff, the same stuff, the same stuff, the same stuff. It wasn't taking. Any of you been like over and over and over? It's not working, right? So you're kind of. I was like, she's really like frozen her body, and I've just started working with Simone, and I've seen the work in my own life through the yoga, and I'm like, you know, I'm gonna try her. I'm gonna see if Simone will start working with me and take this case, and we'll team on it. After one session, oh no, let me back up. She said her goal was to make eye contact. This is how she would do it. Okay? And I'm not joking, okay? I'm not exaggerating to be funny. It was grit, force, and could only last a split second. So she goes to Simone. Simone does one session with her where she's in her body, and this is what happens. Now, she didn't hold eye contact the whole session, but did you see the difference? It wasn't, there's no fist, and after she went back down, she was this little smile of pleased that she was able to do that she was able to actually make eye contact, that she was actually able to connect with me briefly. And the more she did the work, and she did chanting, yoga is not just postures, if I can talk about that for a minute. Any of you practice yoga in here? Let's see hands, just so I get a better sense. Some of you are going, nah, you know, I've been to a class, right? You know, okay. If you've been, I'll take it. I'm just saying, do you have a sense of what it is? Yeah. Okay. So yoga, there's 8 limbs. There's so much more to it than the postures that we think of. There's chanting. There's mudras, which are how your hands are positioned. You know, the prayer pose is a mudra. There's a process of the breath work is an enormous part of it. How they're breathing, how they're moving. The chanting is also the mindfulness and the meditation. So you can see that if they get into a yoga practice, it almost becomes like a way of being more fully in their lives and using their voice. The people who don't know how to, yeah, that's one. Yep. The people who don't know, can't get out into their bodies and don't use their voices very much. Chanting can be very powerful and very frightening. And those clients often won't chant right away. It takes them a little while to get there. But once they do, they begin to feel their breath more. They begin to experience their voice, just the experiencing of their voice. Some of our clients were shut down and not allowed to speak. And some of our clients, that's how they protected themselves, by shutting in, by going in. And that's how they stay safe. And so they're not about to go out there and risk it again. So after this, over time, she got where she was more talkative with me. She was more engaging, and the therapy shifted to actually being able to do the work instead of just trying to get her into the room. And guess what happened to my yawning? I began to dial back. I began to yawn less. Okay? And I have several patients right now who are having physical health issues, and they have fibromyalgia, and they have some of those things that we think of with mind-body health, right? But I also have a number who do not. I had a woman that borderline personality, and we went over and over and over, staying with me and quitting, and staying with me and quitting, and staying with me. You know, you've been fired by borderline before, right? Yeah. So she did, and she came back, and she did, and she came back. But what I noticed where the shift occurred is when she discovered her own yoga practice. Now, this was not through Simone in a partnership. This was on her own. But all of a sudden, she was developing a core. What do you do in yoga? You work on your core, right? The core is these muscles that kind of hold your whole being. And as she began to develop that, she began to be able to take me in. She began to able to see me and even apologize after blowing up and returning. And the therapy shifted, okay? And I've had this in different ways with different patients once they get into their body work and once they start doing that process. So how do you know when you're having, I want to come back to this, how do you know when you're having your own countertransference? I put it up on the screen. What is one way? If you're having a strong affect, right? And another way is if it's dead, treatment, or no energy. I'm going to give you a few more just to kind of get it going. Have you ever been excited? Have you ever been panicked? Afraid? Confused? Have you ever been, now some of you look like you've been at this a while, you look established in your careers. How many of you have been at it 20 years or more in the room right now? First of all, look at that, and let's honor these folks. Good job, guys. Yeah. Now, if you've been at it 20 years or more, you know what you're doing, don't you? Yes, you do. Mostly, right? He's not. Well,
sort of maybe.
Sort of maybe, right. You also begin to learn that you don't know what you're doing, but there's a place where you're not afraid of going into the session. You're pretty confident. You know how it goes. You know how you're going to schedule. You know kind of what to do. You're not scared to go in and get established. But if you ever hit, after you know your stuff, you kind of know the routine, all of a sudden you're like, can't think, you can't figure out what to do, you're having a response that's not, that's your transference. If you have a loss of something that used to be just right there and it's not so there, it doesn't mean you're getting early onset Alzheimer's. It does mean possibly that you have some transference stuff going on, okay? Ever dreading appointment, you're eager for appointment, those kinds of things. And then I want to go back to the breathing and the bodily sensation. How many of you do a debrief between your sessions? Okay, good. How many of you do that debrief by talking to someone? Okay. I have a colleague who's a friend who I call, and even if I get her voicemail, I go, oh my God, I just did this. I can't believe I just did this. Or, oh my God, this client made me crazy. Or, oh my gosh, I feel so happy. Look, this is what happened, right? I have my safe place I go to. I'm in my own therapy when my stuff comes up and I'm dealing with it, right? But how many of you are moving the energy and grounding yourself before, during, and after each session? Good job. Good job. Good job. How many of you are letting yourself notice if you've started pitching out of yourself during a session, okay? Or you're hiding somewhere in the back of your chair.
Oh, you're ready to go after somebody.
Yes, ready to throttle. And it's interesting too because I don't often have that response, but more men in the room. And I was teaching on yoga, and one of the men came up to me after, and this was up at it was a psychoanalytic conference, but he said, I found when I had a client that was very threatening to me, and I was afraid. He said, I went and learned judo, and he said, and I began to feel safe. Now, he did not practice judo on his patient, okay? I mean, he didn't have to do that, but it was a masculine energy response. And so I want to honor that because I know sometimes when I'm talking about the yoga, even though yoga has very powerful warrior poses and all these different things, it's still sometimes you need something even more intensive that feels even more outside masculine. And I'm not saying that's the only way to go if you're a man because I really believe yoga has the stuff for you. But I do think sometimes there's this need to fight. And you don't have to go fight, but sometimes to manage different emotional states, you may need to go do some of these things. Yes?
I think there's another element to that too, Stan,
Yeah.
and that is, I don't know how many of you have been attacked, you know, by clients. I've had 3 in my career, you know, and that sends a message to you, and you're alert from that moment on.
Correct.
Hypervigilance.
Yes.
You know, and then when you take that time in between clients to settle out or settle in, depending on what's going on,
Right.
then you have an opportunity to get stable again.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's what we're talking about, is that in between you get regrounded and recentered. Because you've taken on a lot of the energy of the other person, you've adapted your energy to match that person, you have mirrored their energy in some cases. Or you've been afraid and backed down from it. The other thing that's happening in countertransference is that you're not only dealing with what's coming in the room at you, you have your own trauma history. And some of that trauma history is from your childhood, and some of it, as you're saying, is from your own practice of having been attacked, possibly, or something that happened in your adult life. And a lot of times we think all of this goes back to when we're younger, and it does not have to. But you have your own stuff you have to manage. You have your own stuff that's coming up that's getting triggered. And that is what we have to kind of unsettle out of and go, do I need consultation? Do I have a new issue to work on in therapy? Or do I just need to shake this off? Do I need to shake this off and kind of do some deep breathing and get grounded? And I'll do some sun salutations to move the energy in between sessions because my whole body wants to release this. And it also moves the energy back because sometimes at the end of the day I'm a little tired. sometimes I'm a little exhausted from it, right? So you want to kind of power it back up and get it revved back up and get it turned back on. So the other thing is, how many of you are actively in a consultation group of some sort? Okay. How many of you have a colleague who you actively share cases with or consult with? Okay. If you don't have that at least, and in a group at times, I want to encourage you, because I'm talking about the mind and the body, but we are also still talking about the good old-fashioned relational dynamics that are going on. And you need to feel not alone. You need to feel not alone and not out there by yourself. You cannot reparent everybody. You cannot mother everyone or father everyone. You cannot be everything to everyone. And sometimes when we go into this field, we have a history that we thought we could. Or we were required of that in our family system. We were the one who was supposed to be the savior of the family or the hero. And a lot of times we come into this field just naturally because we play that role over and over and over again. My friends from high school say, oh yeah, Elizabeth was the class psychologist, you know, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I gave everybody a lot of advice, didn't I? Which is what you do when you're in high school and you're the person who's going to become what we become if we become therapists, is you tend to be the one listening and giving advice, right? And what happens is you can get lost and not realize that you've kind of settled in and you're missing out on some of the pieces that you need. The relational pieces, the body attention pieces, and attending to how that's getting triggered. It could be different for every patient and different for you with each patient. Now, I have patterns that are similar. There's a certain thing that happens to me throughout my day that I know are my kind of transference, counter-transference body points, right? At the same time, sometimes individually something new is happening in that case. Something new is getting triggered. Something new is getting turned on. And so we want to be able to attend to both levels where you're being mindful of this and knowing that we are whole beings. We're walking around as whole beings. We're walking around interacting as whole people. And we're not going to interact in this way if we're not attending to all the different levels of who we are. And that's how we get to the end of our career and have a vibrant, healthy life where we're not burned out. We don't have compassion fatigue. We're not resentful of other people or of our patients. We're not bitter. And we have a vibrant life. We have a whole world outside of our therapy practice. And your patients get a better therapist because you are in a different energy state. If you don't think your energy state isn't spilling over and affecting what's going on in the room, you got another thing coming. So I'm aware I'm a little early. Can I be a little early? Okay. All right. Yeah.
I'd like to know what about Bob did.
I went out into.
I know that's probably your
That was
notes,
my
right?
note. When I do a 6-hour training, I use a lot of video clips and break out all this information on a much deeper level. And I tried to shorten it without making it too much, and I shortened it too much, and I apologize for that. But what about Bob is that if you saw, anybody remember the movie? He's screaming out in the parking lot, Dr. So-and-so! You know, I went when I was early 20s. I had my master's degree, and went to this film with my friend who just laughed the whole thing, and I was almost rocking in the fetal position by the time it was over. I hate this movie. So we had that. To me, that's my countertransference. Oh my God, please don't let him follow me home. And at the same time, you want to be careful because our patients are trusting us and giving us them, and I'm not going to say nobody because that has happened. But by and large, our patients know our boundaries, they know who we are, they know who they are, they know where to be and where not to be. And if they're in that much need, there's an intervention level that needs to happen that would help contain that and help treat out of that. You know, but it's just to me an example of some of our stuff that comes up when we're in the field and with the practice. So, yeah.
What are some more important points from your more in-depth presentation? You said you had more time.
She wants
Yeah, well, what I'm saying is I didn't bring all my slides and stuff, but I would walk you down. I would say that the parasympathetic, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system are at play, and they are regulated by the voice tone, the eye contact, the relational dynamics. We can turn that on or turn it off. And we know in trauma that the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system has gotten so turned on and just going run amok, and we're learning that we need to dial that down. And one of the other things that happens with restorative yoga is that it's poses that actually cue the body to regulate down and turn on the parasympathetic nervous system. The way I remember the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic is the sympathetic has sympathy and gets revved up and wants to flee, fight, or freeze. And the parasympathetic is like a parachute that comes wafting down and calms down all those processes. That's the only way I can remember them because I keep getting the terms confused. But the sympathetic is what was needed, and even in their lives as children or whenever this thing happened, if it's a client attacking you, your sympathetic is appropriately triggered and running hard. But we have to learn how to dial it down, and what can happen is just any interaction can trigger all of that. The clients that aren't moving are in freeze mode, if I'm overstating. The people who are ready to fight with you are ready to fight to protect themselves because they're terrified. And if I can say this too, when you're analyzing and working with these folks, you want to interpret whatever you're interpreting from the side of resistance. If they're resisting you, you don't want to push over them or override them. You want to understand why they need to resist you. If they are resisting you, it's to protect themselves. And why do they need to resist you? You want to understand that fully and then help them find out that it's okay to take another step in this direction. But even when the client herself is gritting and decides she's going to make eye contact and look down, she's overriding and taking herself into a territory that feels very dangerous, and that's not the best way to do it, right? It's better for her to find a way to come into it safely. So those are some of my thoughts. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
Thank you for cueing me. Okay. Anything else? Thank you guys for rolling with my...
Yes.